welcome to the Fan of History. I am the Fan of History, and this is my first video about ancient warfare. We are going to talk about the army of the early Neo-Assyrian Empire, and this concerns the Assyrian army before 745 BC. This is the army of all the Assyrian kings before that, primarily Ashurnasirpal II and Shalmaneser III. The sources for this are all Assyrian, which means that they are probably lying to us and putting everything in a better light if they can. Most of the sources discuss the later Neo-Assyrian army, that is after 745 BC. Most of my images are from the depictions of Ashurnasirpal II found in the British Museum. So, this is the best army in the world with a strong warrior ethos, iron weapons and discipline. And many of their opponents don't have any of this. I'm gonna split this into 5 parts. I'll talk about the recruitment and size of the army. I talk about the weapons used and the troops. I talk about what the Assyrians did in open battle and what they did in siege warfare. And I'll mention something about the infrastructure of the army. As I said, this is the first time I do something with ancient warfare. I know there are many people that are very interested in ancient warfare, and this is not my strength in amateur history. I'm more about strategy and politics, but I like to learn more, so if you know something that I miss, just point it out and I'll improve. First, how did the Assyrians get their soldiers? Well, they had a strong tradition. All adult males in Assyria were warriors. Even the scribes and the priests were warriors. They also had a policy that anyone could become an Assyrian. You could, if you worshipped the god of war, you obeyed the Assyrian king, you were an Assyrian. And war for the Assyrian was a religious duty. Everybody wanted to go with the king on campaign, so the king probably had to turn people away. And every year after the harvest, this was an amateur army, it was gathered and then it marched off to war. And we have to stretch it. The prime god of the Assyrians is Ashur, the god of war. And the Assyrians actually believed that Ashur was all gods. So in some strange sense they were monotheists. And all the other gods were like different aspects of Ashur. Ashur demands yearly campaigns, and war is a duty to the god. The king is the voice of Ashur, so whatever he says, you have to obey. So this makes for a pretty motivated army. So how big was it? Shalmaneser III claims that he brought 120,000 men to the field at the Battle of Karkar in 853 BC. A more likely figure is probably 50,000, and I see this size given by many secondary sources. Probably the size of the army was very limited by its supply of food. So I think the Assyrian army could be much larger than this if the heartland was ever threatened. That is Nineveh, Nimrud, Ashur, the main cities on the Tigris. The army would have been much bigger. But that very seldom happens to the early Assyrian army, so they're always fighting on somebody else's turf. Let's talk about weapons and troops employed by the early Neo-Assyrian army. Archers, cavalry, chariotry, infantry, slingers, auxiliaries and siege experts is the primary branches here. And the Assyrian army is all about shooting people with bow. It's all about archers. Everybody has a bow. They are composite bows. They are state-of-the-art bows for this period. They are very practiced at shooting. And it is very common that every archer has a shield bearer. So there is one archer and one shield bearer covering actively the archer with a shield. So the Assyrian army was very good at killing off other archers and protecting their own. Cavalry was invented in the early Neo-Assyrian period. The probably cause for this was that the chariots couldn't get to certain points in the mountains when they fought the tribes of the Zagros mountains, who utilized cavalry, most notably the Medes. Cavalry was known from the steppes of Russia, and it's probably that the Assyrians learned this from there. In the early Assyrian army, cavalry soldiers were archers only, and they had composite bows as well. They didn't have saddles, they didn't have stirrups, and by the end of the early Assyrian army, they will invent the saddle blanket. So they sit on a blanket which provides traction so you don't fall off your horse. But falling off your horse is a constant danger, which means that the cavalry will not engage in melee. The very earliest cavalry consists of two-man teams where one of the riders controls both horses and they're right next to each other, and only one fires the bow. This is eliminated as quickly as they can, but that is the very earliest form that cavalry is used. The Assyrians have used chariots for a long time. The original Assyrian war chariot is a two-man affair. One archer, one driver. They did not drive into infantry. They were used for reconnaissance, they were used for communication, and as cavalry was introduced, they realized that cavalry was just faster. So they moved over to using cavalry for the non-combat duties. And then Ashurnasirpal II introduced the four-horse chariot. And the four-horse chariot actually had one driver, two shield bearers to protect the archer, and one archer. Which doesn't seem very efficient to me, but that was the way the chariots worked. There are also slingers in the army. I think the main advantage of them is that they're cheaper than archers, but they were also deadly accurate. So it seems that the main Assyrian tactic is just to pepper your opponent with arrows, sling bullets, and until he's dead. It is unclear to me at this time when the Assyrian army starts to use auxiliaries, but at some point they take foreign units from vassal states and just put them in the army and use them at what they're best on. And this is exactly the tactic that the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire will use. And it all comes from the Assyrians. A word about the sword, because the Assyrians often mention their swords in their sources. But it seems that the swords are still made of bronze. They're very expensive and they're mostly status symbols. And the only time they actually mention fighting with the swords, they are used for killing captives. So swords are probably just status symbols. The Meele infantry have huge shields and spears, and it is likely that they fought in phalanx-like formations. But we don't know this. There are, however, mentions of earlier Mesopotamian infantry fighting in phalanx formation. We know very little about the infantry. This is one of the rare pictures of the early infantry. And sort of there's no glory for the infantry. It's all about the archers and the cavalry. So how did the Assyrians fight in an open battle? They will engage in the biggest battle in the world to date in 853 BC, the Battle of Karkar, and I will make a video about that battle alone. But they never ever tell us. And this actually extends to the later Neo-Assyrian army as well. So for 300 years, there is not a single source mentioning how an actual battle happened. And that is pretty strange, because there are earlier sources from other Middle Eastern cultures where battle tactics are mentioned, like the Battle of Kadesh. But the Assyrians never speak about how they fight in open battle. And I can only assume that this is intentional, that they don't want to reveal how they fight. So I can only guess here, and I'm not gonna do that to keep the video at a reasonable length. So we don't know anything about open battle, because whenever the Assyrians are fighting in their sources, they are always besieging people. And this is the Assyrian plan for siege warfare. First, you approach the city you want to take, and then you offer, you have a chance to surrender, pay tribute, bow down before the mighty Assyrian king, and you will spare your life. And if the besieged city goes, no way, we are gonna hold out beyond our huge Mesopotamian walls, because cities are usually not taken by siege. Siege favors the defender in this era before the Assyrians. Then the Assyrians moved to step 3, and that is atrocities. So we slaughter everybody we could get to. We slaughter people in villages, we line them up outside the besieged cities, we rape them, we flay them, we put their heads on spikes, and then there's a final offer of surrender. So you've seen what we can do against people we don't like, but if you surrender now, pay your tribute, we're gonna spare you. And if the city doesn't give up, you're in for an expensive siege. And the Assyrians don't want to waste their time. These yearly campaigns are pretty short, so they get really, really angry if the city has not given up. And they will kill everybody in the cities. They will some of the time deport people, but they are not usually taken from besieged cities. But the main goal of besieging cities is always to get them to surrender in step 2. Surrender, pay your tribute, swear loyalty, provide supplies, and give up. But now, if there is a siege, the Assyrians are masters of siege warfare. This picture is from Ashurnasirpal II, and there are so many clever things that the Assyrians do. They invent a lot of things concerning siege warfare, and I won't go into details on this because it probably deserves its own video. And if you want a video on early Assyrian siege warfare, tell me so in the comments and I'll see what I can do. So, if the city then did not give up, the siege worked, it's time for atrocities. And I'm just going to give you one example. You can check the events of the 870s BC part 1, because that episode is going to contain a lot of Assyrian atrocities. This is from Ashurnasirpal II. I will quote this one. I felled their fighting men with a sword. I burned 200 captives and defeated in a battle on the plain the troops. With their blood I dyed the mountain red like red wool, and the rest of them the ravines and torrents of the mountain swallowed. I carried off captives and possessions from them. I cut off the heads of their fighters, and built a tower before the city of their heads, and I burnt their young boys and girls. There is more of that in the 870s BC part 1. So, how did the Assyrians structure all of this? The thing they did, they put up supply depots. That was the original plan. Then they decided that they had to have Assyrian governors or loyal vassal states. So first there is a message from the Assyrian king. We are coming, we are marching through your province or your vassal state. You will have to supply the army or you will die. And so they were often supplied. And the vassal states, the governors, went to any length to make sure that this army is supplied. And it seems to have worked. There are 12 provinces in the days of the early Assyrian Empire. And these provinces and their governors will get more and more power, which will become a problem for the empire. One word about camels then, because I'm going to talk about camels in the Battle of Karkar. But I want to mention that the Assyrians are using camels, but they are only used as beasts of burden. So they will not, the Assyrian army is used to camels, but they will not try to fight on camelback, because that is way too complicated for them. They are still trying to master horses, so they are not going to try to ride on their camels. So what happens then after 745 BC? Well, this army I've just described to you was the best army in the world, but the army of the early Neo-Assyrian Empire would stand no chance against the army of the late Neo-Assyrian Army. So the best army in the world levels up, and it's all because of one man so terrible that the neighboring states will mention him only as the Assyrian. Stay tuned to the Decade Reports. I will talk more about the Assyrian army. I will talk about the Battle of Karkar. The Battle of Karkar is the biggest battle the world has ever seen before this. And there will be a lot of nations going up against Shalmaneser III and the early Neo-Assyrian army, and we will see how they do in that battle. Stay tuned to the Fan of History channel, talk to me on Facebook and Twitter, and please subscribe, like and share, because that's the way you'll keep me going. Thank you for watching.